Okay, so very glad to be with all of you, and we're gonna engage in the presentation looking at this topic, conflict deconstructed. Let me see if I can put this in presentation mode. Okay, so it's an interesting topic for a number of reasons, and we will just share some of the key points that we want you to think about. And as is our tendency, as we go through this presentation, I'm going to ask you to really tune into your heart, tune into your intelligence, tune into your mind. And as we go through, keep aware of anything that particularly resonates with you, anything that stands out to you that you've not considered before, anything that could be an additional angle or perspective that can help you moving forward in this particular topic, because it's a very fascinating topic, and we want to, as we said, explore it from various angles of vision to give some ideas and some insights into how we can navigate this particular subject matter. And I guess the best place to start is with this point regarding Kali Yuga. Okay, so it's a very, very interesting definition of this age of Kali. So we live in this particular period in time. We know that there were previous ages, and those previous ages were defined by people of a certain caliber, of a certain consciousness. So we also know that we live in the Kali Yuga age. What does that mean precisely to us, and what does it have to do with this topic? So the Shastra defines Kali Yuga as the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. I'll repeat that because it's so fundamental to everything we're going to discuss. It is the age of quarrel. So we know that this is a defining characteristic of this time, and this age of hypocrisy. Now, let's break that down and try to understand what that means. An age of quarrel and hypocrisy literally can mean two things. On the surface, it can mean something very negative. But if we dig beneath the surface, we can see some profound golden opportunity. If an age is defined by a certain characteristic, a certain activity, a certain behavior, and if we learn to be masterful and expert in the exact same behavior that defines the age, then we will be guaranteed tremendous success. I'll break this down. In other words, if Kali Yuga is the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, it literally means that anyone, individual, family, business partnership, community, whatever it is, it means that any grouping who have learned to deal with conflict, right? Because we know it's quarrel. It defines the atmosphere. It will always be there in this age. So therefore, any group who've learned to deal with this aspect of conflict in a healthy, constructive, and progressive way are guaranteed to become extraordinarily successful. Why? Because it means that every time they hit one of these quarrels, which they are inevitably going to come across in the age of Kali, they will be able to embrace the quarrel. They will be able to understand the conflict. Excuse me. And they will be able to virtually use each and every conflict or challenge as a stepping stone and a catalyst for greater success in their particular journey, and for us especially in our spiritual lives. That is why this subject matter, conflict deconstructed, is literally a crucial skill set for each and every one of us to develop at this time in this particular age, okay? So we need to understand what it means to have a conflict. We need to understand the elements and the dynamics of a conflict. And most importantly, we need to understand how we can transform conflict into something positive and progressive rather than something debilitating. So let's first of all explore why conflict becomes such a negative thing for so many people. And it really has a lot to do with what we call the traditional view of conflict, let's say recognition or resolution. So in the traditional view of conflict resolution, oftentimes people feel the conflict is to be avoided, right? They have a mentality where they're looking to ignore a conflict or to minimize a conflict or to kind of skirt over fundamental issues, okay? And if we break it down in terms of the modes of material nature, when we deal with things in a superficial way, or when we deal with things in a whimsical way, we're really looking at passion. We're really looking at ignorance. Okay, and the reason why people have this mentality is because in many cases, we've experienced conflict as a win or lose, and therefore naturally, no one wants to be in that category of the loser. We often deal with conflict in such a way that we may either feel powerless and a victim, or we may feel domineering, and that can lead to the other extreme where we feel like we're the bully who's trying to overpower other people, okay? So this is an old view. This is an old mentality when we're dealing with conflicts. And we want to set this aside for this discussion today. We want to try to explore conflict in a different way, okay? We want to shift the paradigm to see conflict as something which can be profoundly progressive for our spiritual journey. And I'm going to pause there because just that mentality by itself can start to lead to some very, very new ways of thinking about this issue. And when we think about things in a different way, it can start to lead to different outcomes, okay? And I really want you to think about this point very carefully. Behind every conflict, and we'll touch upon this a bit more as we go through, behind every conflict is also a mentality, okay? And this is really, really important. Behind every single conflict, you have a certain mentality, and that mentality is driving the conflict either to a positive outcome or to a destructive outcome. Okay, and I'm going to pause there because I'm going to make it interactive. In the chat window, first of all, I'm just going to check with the organizers. Will everyone be able to share something in the chat? I'm just going to ask that question first.
Yes, Prabhu, there will be.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so if we're to use conflict in a positive and constructive way, I'm going to ask you to share in the chat window and make it available to everyone. Share with me some ideas. What should my mentality be? Okay, and I've talked about a few things already, but I want to hear other angles on this. What should my mentality be when I'm approaching a situation of conflict in order to maximize the chances of a positive outcome in terms of that issue? Share your answers in the chat window. Okay, thank you. So definitely open-minded, definitely Luke, that's very, very powerful. Thank you, Nandini, good to see you on the call. Yes, so being objective and unbiased, very, very interesting. We're gonna make this very interactive because as we all have the super soul in our hearts, if we start to look at this, what we're doing is we're literally zooming out. We're zooming out rather than being the emotionally triggered person in the issue. We're gonna zoom out and look at it from a more broad and wholesome and holistic paradigm. Okay, and I can already see some incredible and very, very healthy answers that you're all sharing at the moment. So I'm going to start to explore some of these before I share some further points, which I want to bring to our discussion today. So let's look at some of these. So Sarasvati, definitely not having a defensive mindset. Umika, yeah, being non-judgmental, definitely being empathetic is really very powerful. And GP, I love this point. Looking at things not in terms of wrong or right, but looking at things in terms of Krishna conscious. And we're going to talk about that a bit later on as one of the key things behind healthy ways of transforming conflict. I love the point that you shared, Ashish. There's a difference between responding to a conflict and reacting to a conflict. So when we react to something, we tend to be more emotionally triggered. When we respond to something, we're more thoughtful. And I think Priyanka, sorry, you've also made the point. We're more thoughtful. We're using more of our intelligence as well. Vishal, I love the point. Yes, listening to understand first. It's a very key paradigm. Even in the secular world, I believe it's Covey put this down, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's definitely in line with our teachings, seek first to understand. And I'll just draw that point out because that also leads to what I call the mirror effect. Because if I first take the time to understand you, there's much more likelihood that you're going to respond in a similar way. Okay, that's powerful. I love the point that Janaf, you put, you and the other person versus the problem. Yes, there's some research on this. There's a TED talk, and it's called The Walk from No to Yes. And what they were talking about was the body language that people use in resolving a conflict. And what they discovered in this particular TED talk, they were talking about how there were many situations where you have 2 people in a conflict. And what they would do, rather than sitting face to face, trying to deal with the conflict, the 2 people would go on a walk together. They would take a walk together and discuss the issue that they had. And it's very powerful. They found that when people did this, what started to happen was the change in physiognomy, the change in the physiology rather, the change in the body language, the posture and the movement also triggered a change in the mindset. Right? So because those 2 people were walking together in the same direction while discussing their disagreement, it had a subtle shifting effect. And instead of seeing themselves against one another, as we said, that win versus lose paradigm, they started to shift into what we call the win-win paradigm, where they were moving progressively forward. This is very powerful. Radhika, your point about compassion. Yes, if we want to resolve something, we have to go beneath the surface. We have to see what we call the fundamental needs. Absolutely. Selena, I love this point, focusing on the issue, not the person. And that's very powerful because when we focus on the issue and not the person, if we really adopt that mentality, it's expressed by a change in communication. You see, you can understand the mindset by the communication. So when I focus on the issue, then rather than speaking in terms of blame, I speak in terms of issue, I speak in terms of resolution, I speak in terms of needs. I start to explore the context, not the character. Very, very important. Rajesh, I love this point, willing to listen to others. That gives psychological oxygen. We open up the doorway for a discussion, and that's really, really powerful, okay? Now, this is really powerful also. Imran, I love this point. Definitely Bhakti Tirthamaj, and just to give you some idea of where we're getting some of the points we're sharing, there's an entire chapter in a book called Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness. And there's an entire chapter, it's called Resolving Conflict for the Benefit of All. So we're just discussing and sharing some ideas in line with that particular paradigm. So thank you very much for that. Now that also, I'll just add that point, looking to see what we may have done, it also requires a certain level of maturity. you know, but it's very, very powerful. And we'll come back to that as well. Okay, so yes, you see, this is an important point, Bishal. If it's a person, we need to be empathetic, accept how we feel, because our feelings are reflective of how others are feeling, or how others may react to us as well. So that's absolutely. And I can see Kamala Kant, good to see you on the call as well. Definitely compassion is important. You know, it's definitely important. And Simran, I loved your question. That's really the heart of what we're talking about throughout the entire seminar. So how we can resolve the conflict so that both parties feel loved and appreciated and are able to move on. Otherwise, what we do in the short term is we paper over the cracks. And what happens in the longer term is that the issue will resurface itself in some other way. Okay, let's go to Andrea. Yes, going for a walk, getting a regular space, that's really powerful, because what that speaks to is getting some psychological space so we can look at things on a broader perspective. Another thing about the psychological space is sleeping on an issue. Another thing about psychological space is getting another perspective on what we are going through, okay? And that links to the other point, which is just below, pulling ourselves in the other person's shoes in order to change the perspective and, yes, create a shift. Let's go to one more, Karishma. Taking responsibility, never defend yourself unless you're absolutely right or there is a misunderstanding. Okay, taking responsibility for whatever role we are playing or that we have played in the issue which is manifesting for us. Okay, so let's go into this. You shared a lot, and the reason why I'm glad that you did this is because we want to whet your appetite. This literally everything we do in this space of seminars and programs is to expand consciousness. And the way that we expand consciousness is to get us to take different perspectives, to see things from different angles. And it's very interesting. The neuroscience talks about this. Once you've seen something from another perspective, once you've seen something from a broader angle, you create new neural pathways. And as long as you keep nourishing that new perspective, whenever you come to a situation, you're going to start to see it in a different way. So what we're doing in the seminar, I'm going to bring to conscious awareness what I've been planning beneath the surface with this seminar. What we want to do is transform your very paradigm around conflict. Okay, so that the next time you come across a challenge and an issue, you won't be triggered, because you will have a range of different tools and different perceptions around that, which can literally take you from going into a conflict feeling anxious, nervous, and scared, literally to going into a conflict feeling excited, energized for the adventure and for the positive outcomes. And I mean this. I've been trying to explore these tools myself, and I've seen some incredible results. Okay, so please, as we go through, I really want you to listen in, listen for ideas, and there's already a tremendous amount that you've picked up and that you shared with your peers on the call. And this is why we do this, because the super soul is in your heart. I'm going to really emphasize this, because that was a deal breaker for me. That was a game changer for me. The super soul is in your heart and in my heart. And when we connect together as spiritual people, trying to understand things from a higher perspective, miracles happen. Okay, I can tell you, I swear on my own life, I've seen that in my life. When we have that mentality and we come together open-hearted, ready to be a receiver, to receive insight, to receive answers, to receive deeper resolutions and gems from Krishna, miracles happen. And those miracles stay within our heart, and they define our future vision and our future consciousness, and therefore the way that we will resolve things in the future. Okay, so really think about this and make notes. Don't lose any of the benefits that you're getting from your peers on the call, who are sharing their own insights and understandings on how we can move this forward. Let's take it a step on. So we talked about this idea of new approaches, okay? And I want to really outline this deeper approach to dealing with conflict. So we're going to define our terms. So I'm going to actually use the term conflict management to deal with the old paradigm, okay? So what does that mean? The old way of dealing with conflicts. So one, short-term thinking, okay? Win-lose thinking, okay? Second point, the idea of containing the conflict. So something's going wrong, let's just paper over the cracks, let's stop it erupting, let's just contain it, let's just repress it, push it down, keep it hidden, or keep it in its box. Okay, another definition of the old paradigm of conflict management is that we just addressed the symptoms. Okay, so again, we can look at conflict resolution in 3 modes. And these points, short-term thinking, win-lose thinking, keeping things hidden, pushing things away, just addressing the symptoms, these factors characterize conflict resolution in the modes of passion and or ignorance. Now, the other side, real conflict resolution, this is where we're dealing with conflict resolution in the mode of goodness. Let me give you a few factors that relate to this. Okay, so when we deal with conflict resolution, we're trying to probe more deeply to get to the heart of an issue in order to bring about lasting change. Okay, I'll pause there because that's a really important thing to bear in mind. There's the defining characteristic of conflict resolution in the mode of goodness is that the defining characteristic is that you go beneath the surface. Okay, you go beneath the surface of whatever is happening to look for something. Okay, let's expand on this. You see, there's 2 levels of vision or perception around a conflict. What they use generally in the materialistic worldview is where there is a conflict over certain material wants and material interests. Okay, that creates what we call the win-lose paradigm, and it creates a very narrow field of exchange. What I mean by that is there's some money on the table, okay? There's a finite amount of money. We're arguing over who should get the money. It doesn't give you much room to maneuver because you're dealing with just the surface limited material elements. But there's a higher paradigm and a higher platform. And that is that when we go beneath the issue, we can start to come to the search for universal human needs. So behind every want, behind every demand, there is a more deep and underlying universal human need that is being indirectly indicated. Okay, and if you want to become expert in resolving conflict, it literally means to become expert in seeing what's behind the behavior. Okay, when we try to deal with conflicts effectively, we have to look what's going on the surface, but we can't stop there. We have to go behind that to see what's behind the curtain. I remember I was in Gita Nagari, which is a community in Pennsylvania, a devotional community. And I was giving a seminar on leadership. And it was an interesting seminar. I was giving the seminar on leadership and I had a few people present. And at one point in the seminar, it just got a bit frustrating for me, to be very honest. What was frustrating is I was saying something and then there was one person who would cut into what I was saying and literally would say something completely different to or opposing what I was saying. And this went on for some time. And it was interesting because the seminar was on leadership, and I was referencing, various points from the Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness 1 and 2 books. And luck, I don't know, it was just such great fortune. At some point, something just came internally. What came internally was this trigger. I was reminded of some of the points that I'd read and researched in relation to this topic. And it just came very, very naturally. I turned to the rest of the audience and I said to them, in relation to the person who kept interrupting, I said to the rest of the audience, I said, we have a scholar in our midst. Well, it happened, even without me being consciously aware, something had come up that, okay, this person, if they are constantly interrupting what you're saying, if you search deeper, right? So, okay, let's pull aside the fact that it's annoying. Okay, let's leave that to one side for a moment. If I dig beneath the surface, what could be the universal human need that is being indirectly indicated through this behavior of consciously and repeatedly cutting in to what I'm saying? And it became very clear, unconsciously at first, that this person, they had an underlying need which was not being met. And that need was a need for appreciation, a need for recognition, a need for feeling heard. So when I responded like that, we have a scholar in our midst. It was so interesting, because literally from that point onwards, this person didn't contradict, didn't cut in, nothing. I mean, I'll be honest, even when I think about it, I'm still shocked, like really? Like, just nothing. The entire approach of this person shifted, which is one of the symptoms. I'm doing a huge exploration of our teachings, and there's certain universal things that I'm coming across. And one of them is this idea of looking at the external symptoms and picking up what sits beneath those symptoms. Okay, it's not just something that applies here. You will see that principle appears again and again throughout the Shastra. A very interesting example, Harinam Chintamani, a literature written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he talks about devotional service, and he talks about what is called the Swarup Lakshanam and the Tatasya Lakshanam. So the Swarup Lakshanam is the primary characteristic, okay? And he explains that the primary characteristic is surrender to Krishna. Then he also explains the Tatasya Lakshanam, which is the secondary characteristics of devotional service, which are the 26 qualities of a devotee. So in many paradigms, you'll see this, that there are the external secondary things, but if you go behind it, there's something that is driving the secondary, okay? And it's a paradigm that you can apply to so many areas of life. So behind people's behaviors, even their unpalatable behaviors, there is always an underlying universal human need. And the more that we can become expert to attuning to the underlying, the hidden, the more that we can resolve conflicts even in their seed form. See, there is such a thing as the unmanifested conflict. And that is where things are boiling up in the subtle level. And someone who's very tuned in can pick things up early before they become an issue and just resolve it before it becomes gross and before it becomes protracted in that sense. So real conflict resolution, in essence, conflict resolution in the mode of goodness is defined by looking beneath the surface to understand the universal human needs. And the reason why this is so essential is because if we understand the underlying needs rather than the external, idea of conflict management, then it gives you far more room to maneuver. It gives you far more bandwidth, because then if you understand what the underlying need is, you can literally find many, many more ways to resolve that than if you just look to the surface demand or the surface discord, because that will be a very narrow paradigm. Okay, and we can answer any questions that you may have on that as we go through. So I'll give you a very simple example, right? So many of you may see this. So I've seen situations where we're working in a team, and you can see, it's so interesting. You can see you're working in a team, and there's someone in the team, and they just have this overly controlling tendency, right? And they may even, and let's take it further. One is an overly controlling tendency. The second, you can kind of see there's a tendency to, whatever you're doing, they want to pull it away from you, right? So a desire to an overly strong desire to control, and possibly even like a desire for envy. You have something, I want to take what you have. So when you boil beneath the surface, right? When I look beneath the surface, what am I seeing? Okay, they're overly controlling. My spiritual master said that someone who is overly controlling, it is a sign that they lack faith in the supreme person. Because if you feel that you're protected and you're secure in your relationship with the supreme person, that all your needs will ultimately be met, then you're more able to be calm and create a space of give and take. But when people are overly controlling, that usually means that behind it, there's this insecurity. So when I was looking at it, I realized, okay, this person has a deep insecurity. So that's one thing. Then the second factor, you have something, I want it instead. So what does that mean? So behind envy is a desire for appreciation. You see? So this is actually a practice. And funnily enough, the more that an individual comes to the mode of goodness, the easier and the more likely they are to see things in a deeper and more penetrating way. I believe it's the 14th chapter, it may be text number 11 in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna talks about when one is in the mode of goodness, all the gates of the body become illuminated by knowledge. So one is able to see something, but you don't just see the surface, you see beneath the surface. Okay, what's behind this? Why is this person acting this way? But you can also start to explore what they're really needing. And this is even more powerful, right? This is even more powerful. So one paradigm is we look at the universal human needs. We start to see what the person is really calling out for, okay? They're demanding one thing, but what's behind it? What are they really needing, okay? What's the underlying universal human need that they're struggling with that we, if we keep the mood of a servant, can try to help them to resolve? But even more powerful is this, okay? The reason, and this is really interesting, when I started to explore this topic, this came to me and it really hit me. And I thought this was really something I wanted to share. This is something I was really excited to share with people. And that is that for most of us, we are living in this state. We're living in the state of the unmanifested conflict. What does that mean? You see, it's easy to think of a conflict as the problem that this person has. I'm involved in this conflict because they're like this. And that could be true, but there's more. If something really disturbs us a lot, then that's a trigger or literally a message to us that we're not as deeply grounded as we could be, okay? And what does that mean? You see, we get triggered where we ourselves have internal issues and conflicts that we haven't resolved. We get triggered also when we're not moving in a healthy way towards superior and meaningful needs. Okay, so think about this carefully. All behavior is either an expression of love or a call for love. Why am I calling for love in a destructive way? Why am I calling for love by trying to be overly controlling? Why am I calling for love by trying to take something away from another person? it's because I'm not moving towards a healthy target. What do I mean by a healthy target? In our lives, true dynamism means that each and every day, when we're taking steps forward to meet our real and meaningful needs. To the extent that I do not live my life taking steps forward to real and meaningful needs, to that extent, I leave my life and my consciousness open to becoming a moving target. That means I leave my consciousness open to being disturbed by other people's negative behaviors towards me. You see? And we know this intuitively. In fact, this understanding is embedded in modern culture, right? We have these phrases: the devil makes work for idle hands, right? That's one phrase. We also have this, what's it? An idle mind is the devil's workshop. I really want to bring this to you. We are, all of us, or most of us in our lives, we're carrying this. We're carrying the unmanifested conflict. To the extent that in my life, I don't look within, I don't resolve issues that are there within my own consciousness, to the extent that I'm not living a life which is proactively moving towards meaningful goals, which are going to fulfill deep needs, not superficial goals, meaningful goals that will fulfill real and deep needs. To the extent that I don't have a life which is dynamic and moving in that positive direction, to that extent, I leave my consciousness open to being easily triggered by the unresolved issues of other people. So in order to live that kind of life, and in order to resolve conflicts in a healthy way, we need to communicate and acknowledge at least 3 things. Okay, this is really important. And this is a language also of conflict resolution. So in our own lives, it is really important. I'm going to ask you to do this as homework, to identify for yourself, what do you need in life? Okay, and especially in spiritual life, what do you need? I've seen in Krishna consciousness over 20 plus years, 25 years actually, almost 25 years of exploring and seeing devotees who are really successful and the devotees who are not successful. And I've tried to outline and explore, and I spoke about this recently in the seminar, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Devotees, but I'm going to share it from a different angle here. If you look very carefully, you will see that the devotees who are incredibly successful in their lives, in their spiritual lives, and not just successful, I don't mean by success, by the way, externally successful only. That may or may not be there. But the devotees who feel happy, okay, who are happy in their spiritual life, which is real success. The devotees who are fulfilled in their spiritual life, they are very conscious of, and they are living a life that aligns with their true needs. Okay, so one of the pieces of homework I'm going to ask you to do, and you can write this down on pen and paper. You can also do this through consultation with friends and mentors. And I had an experience about this I'm going to share with you when I heard this from one of my mentors. It was incredible. It is imperative, if you do not want to have a life where you're constantly hitting conflicts, which are being drawn to you because life, Krishna is trying to tell you something, you need to be clear about your needs. What do you really need to be happy and progressive and fulfilled in Krishna consciousness? Okay, really understand. It may be that for some of us, it's about, I need an intimate relationship. So it's about marriage and having that, because that not being there is causing some disturbance, some agitation. For someone else, it may be, I have a need for contribution. Okay, so these are natural human needs. So I've got all of these ideas and I need to contribute. I need to, do that. For someone else, it may be, I have a need to make a unique offering. I was reflecting on this point. There's a pastime with Prabhupada, So so Prabhupada was challenged. I believe it may have been in India. So one gentleman said to Prabhupada, why are you doing all this? Why are you just building these, temples? Why don't you do something else? We've got so many temples already. Okay, so why do you spend all this time? Why don't you do something useful? Prabhupada, the gentleman who asked Prabhupada that question, Prabhupada didn't answer that gentleman straight away. I was hearing this it was a memory that it was a pastime that was being spoken of by one of my dear spiritual uncles who passed away recently, His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj, who was brilliant at resolving conflicts and bringing people together. So he's sharing this pastime. And he's sharing how Prabhupada, when Prabhupada heard that, Prabhupada didn't immediately answer the question. Prabhupada turned to the man who asked the question and said to the man, "Who is that woman sitting next to you?" And the man replied, she said, "She's my wife." And Prabhupada said to him, "Why did you get married?" Right? And the man was a bit taken aback. And Prabhupada said, "You got married because you wanted to have a family." And the man agreed, "Yeah, I wanted to have children." And Prabhupada said to him, "But why did you want to have children? There are so many orphans, right? So why do you want to have your own child?" And then Prabhupada explained to him, so you wanted to have your own child. So just in the same way that you wanted to have your own child, we also want to make our own offering to Krishna. So it's a very powerful way of explaining this. Many times we get triggered by other people because we're not clear on our own needs, and but legitimate needs, not whims, which is a mode of ignorance, not just desires, which are a mode of passion, but needs, fundamental needs. I was in Radhadesh, and I was called into a meeting by one of my Shiksha gurus, and I'll tell you, it was one of the most powerful meetings of my entire life. He called me and my wife into his room, and we were in Radhadesh. And he sat down and he told me, I believe it was maybe 3 years ago. And even when I think about it, it's so powerful. And he started to tell me things about myself. And he basically reoriented my focus. And he basically steered me like, don't do this. You should be focusing on this. It was incredible. And what he really focused me to was this. Certain key needs that he had picked up, certain key needs, and he was helping me to understand. I want you to really focus on these things that you really should be focusing on at this point in your spiritual journey. And it started to help me to understand that when devotees do this more and more, I mean, you will see the movement change in ways that you can't imagine. Because in lower consciousness, we focus on our whims, which is a mode of ignorance, or just our desires, which is a mode of passion. The sad thing about it is that those two things don't make you happy. But when we get into certain fundamental needs, then the fulfillment comes because it's coming from a deeper place. In order to resolve conflicts, it's about clarifying real needs, clarifying real expectations, clarifying real concerns. And as we said before, it's really about trying to understand what are the human universal things. Desires for appreciation is universal. Desires for identity is universal. Desires for, contribution is universal. When we start to dig into these things, we can deal with conflict from a different place. We can deal with conflict by starting to go to a mood of collaboration, vulnerability, and we have to resolve to solve. We need to be doing that self-work. If I start to work on myself, if I live a life which has integrity, if I live a life where my needs are being consciously taken care of, it means I take responsibility for my needs. I communicate my expectations. I communicate my concerns in all relationships. And I do this early, earnestly, and clearly. if I do these things, you will see that you can resolve many conflicts before they even begin. When I do projects, when I work with teams, I'm very conscious about these things. I remember one project I was working with someone, I'm involved in one or two, well, right now I'm involved in loads of projects. I'm always involved in too many projects, but so many projects, one of the first things I do is clarify expectations, right? So we're going to be working together. And in my leadership training and coaching, we often tell managers, don't assume anything. Don't assume that your expectation is the same as the expectation of someone else. Right now in business, one of the biggest challenges that the previous generations of leaders are having are challenges around managing millennials, right? And in many cases, they're bewildered because they're like, oh, they don't act the way that we did, all that kind of stuff. And they're not clear on expectations. And if we don't have clarity on expectations, what will happen is one person thinks that they're doing a great job, whereas the other person is getting frustrated because we never had that communication up front. We never sat down and said, okay, if we're going to be in a relationship, I'm pushing my mentees, right? And I'm training people that one of the most important things that you can do if you're looking to get married is have this conversation about what the other person expects up front. And I don't stop there. I tell them not only to have that conversation up front, but before you have the conversation, give them the chance to go away and really think about it and give them the space so that they can feel that they can be as open and honest as possible about what they really are looking for and what they're really expecting in that relationship. Because if they don't do that up front, then what happens, and I've seen this happen, and this is one of the reasons why there's so much divorce, what to speak of people who are together and they hate each other, right? Separation, or, you know, so there's so much divorce, there's so much separation, or even just huge resentment in a relationship because people did not clearly communicate their expectations, their needs, and their concerns early and upfront. They allowed what the unmanifested conflict. They allowed it just keep coming, and then what happens is, of course, it's one day it was unmanifested, but later on, you know, it becomes manifested. You know, so we can remove conflicts at the early stages by communicating our needs, expectations, but also providing psychological space for others to also share that. What do they really need? What do they really expect? But also, if you're really intelligent, look for the unexplained needs, because people don't know themselves in Kali Yuga. I'm going to do a whole seminar on that, actually. That will come up a bit later on. We'll share a lot on that topic. But people don't know themselves in this age. So in many cases, many of us, we can't communicate our needs because we're still figuring them out. So it's also about an evolving journey where we're continually observing and interacting and dialoguing as things become surfaced. A few other things, and then we'll open up for questions. So, to resolve conflict is not just a question of speech, but it's also that we need to resolve conflict by having an internal space of harmony. That is what we are. When we have an internal space of harmony, the second level is the knowing, what we know, the knowledge, the wisdom. Then from there, we come to what we do, how we act, and then what we say, right? How we interact, how we dialogue. The highest level of conflict resolution, therefore, is internal work. The highest level of conflict resolution is that I'm harmonious. When I'm harmonious, when I'm healing, when I'm moving dynamically in my own life, when I'm taking responsibility for my needs and moving towards them, then I will be less triggered by what anyone else says or does. Therefore, when I'm in a conflict, it is also a sign that I myself am not so grounded. I myself am not so much in internal harmony, which is why I'm so easily disturbed or affected by what another person is doing. Okay, so we want you to really think about that. This is what we call the hierarchy of influence. the last point, and I'll take questions and comments, is that behind every conflict, and this is what we see in the model for conflict resolution that was shown to us in the Bhagavad Gita, behind every conflict, there's a higher calling, okay? And that is the voice of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The best way to resolve all conflict is to really tune into understanding what Krishna is trying to show us in this situation. Two things. One is, what is he trying to show me or teach me? And two, what does he want me to do about it? Okay. So sometimes even we can say, sometimes a conflict is resolved, an inner conflict is resolved, to be honest, even through external disagreement. I know right now certain devotees, and Krishna, he keeps sending people to them. Why? Why? It's because he wants them to learn to be assertive. So he's allowing them in their life to constantly come across people who are a bit overpowering, a bit domineering, because what he wants them to learn is to learn to be a bit more assertive. I want you to have that balance in your own life. So these are some key points around conflict. One, what is the, let's just go back a few stages. What is the universal human need that sits behind the behavior? Okay, and how can I fulfill that universal need? Because that's the deeper thing. Is it that the person needs identity? Is it the person is looking for contribution? Whatever it is, what's behind that behavior? Second is, how am I also being dynamic? If I'm dynamically taking care of my own needs, I will not be triggered so much by other people. How am I communicating my own needs, expectations, and concerns early on in different relationships, which means that there's less conflict that can manifest in the first place? How am I doing self-work to also be the vulnerable person to share? You know, so when, and this is a model that you can use, you speak about the observation. So when you did this, then you speak about how it made you feel. I felt this way. And then you speak about what you required, because I have a need for X. I'll repeat that. This is a framework for addressing an issue in a healthy way. So observation is part one. When you did this, then my inner feeling, okay, part two, I felt this. Third stage, what's behind it? What was I needing? Because I have a need for X. Now just think about how powerful that is. It's a very different paradigm to blaming someone, okay? But it's observation, so you keep it objective. When this situation happened, I felt this way because I have a need for this. And then the last stage, stage 4, is you make a respectful request, okay? So 4 stages: observation, feeling, need, request. I'll repeat: observation, feeling, need, and request. So that's one way of addressing something that's not working in a situation and bringing it through to a request to bring the situation to a higher level. But bear in mind that it's not that by requesting something that we're always going to get what we want. Ultimately, in every situation, there's a higher calling. I'm going to share something with you. In 2003, I was on a car journey with Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and he was on his way to give a seminar at one center, and he was talking about one area of responsibility that he had, and there was some, let's say, some internal politics, and a situation happened where a conflict came up, and he shared something very interesting. He was reflecting, and he was coming to the realization that Krishna was directing him to move in a slightly different direction. So don't be fearful of conflict. Try to understand, where is the direction? One of our friends, one devotee I know, when he was embarking on some particular project, which became very successful, he took advice from one of his mentors. And the advice his mentor said to him, he said, what you should do is knock on many doors and see which doors open. So in any conflict, we're looking to see where what Krishna is teaching us and where we are being directed, because sometimes one door is closing because the Supreme Personality of Godhead wants you to move in a different direction. Okay? He wants you to learn something about yourself. And when you learn that lesson, the symptom is that you will no longer be so triggered by an issue, and you will move into a higher space. You will move into a higher level of fulfillment. You will ultimately move into a higher level of Krishna consciousness. So I'm going to pause there. We'll have about 15 minutes for questions. These are some points of consideration when we are thinking about conflict in a deeper and more powerful way. Okay, I'm going to go to the organizers and ask if you have any questions from this point onwards.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Yes, we do have a number of questions which have been asked privately, so I will read them out to you. The first one we have, it says, how do you know what's a need, a whim, and a desire? Sometimes you may think it's a need, but others may say it's just a whim.
Okay, so that is a very sensitive thing. So there's a few things it requires. So you may want to look at, I mean, I don't know if anyone on this group has it, but there's a very powerful section in a book, or it's a manual called The Tree of Life by His Holiness Satchidananda Swami. And in that manual, he talks about certain needs. He actually lists them. And there are things like need for significance, need for security, etc. What I can do is I can make those available to the organizers of the call, and then they can share them on. But it actually outlines 6 fundamental needs. Okay, so then that way you can start to understand whether it's just something external, like I want my face to be on the poster. Okay, but what's behind that? What's the need, right? So it's usually something around significance. So therefore, when we look at that, if I trace it back to the fundamental need, then it may not be that the poster can have that person's face on it, but maybe there's something else that that person can do for themselves, or that can be facilitated for that person so that they feel significant, even though we can't put their name or their picture on the poster for another reason. Okay, so there's some fundamental categories that you can explore or dig into that help you to understand what are fundamental needs, as opposed to just ego wants. So that's one way you can look at that. Any other question?
Perfect, thank you. Yes, we have another question. It says, how can we overcome a conflict after my own feelings have been hurt and I feel a certain resentment towards the other person?
Okay, so the first thing we have to do there is heal. Okay, and that can take time. So therefore, one of the most important things for all devotees to do is have a network of supportive peers. Okay, and then along with that network of supportive peers, one should also be doing regular self-work. In other words, the quality of our hearing, our chanting, and also our services that make us feel fulfilled and inspired, those things are really important as well. We do all of those together. Therefore, we're in a stronger space to deal with issues which will arise. As we said at the beginning, Kali Yuga is the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. So these things will happen. So we have to be expecting those. And there's a whole science to what we call self-soothing or self-nurturing. So when our feelings have been hurt, we can journal, we can pray, right? We can take time away if we need to. We can look, we can try to understand, what is life trying to teach me? We can do activities that make us feel rejuvenated and whole again. There's a number of things that we can do. And when we're in a calmer space, then we may address the issue more directly with the individual in order to try to resolve it through that model. You know, so this is the observation I had. When this happened, this is how I felt because I was needing this. Now we can then ask for a request. We can also ask the individual more about why they responded the way that they did. And we can also ask or see if there is that synergy where we can resolve this in a cooperative way, or if the higher thing in that situation is that we may need to explore the dynamics in a different way between us and different people, because the dynamic between us and that person may not have so much chemistry. You see, so sometimes you have to really be deep on this. sometimes that lesson from Krishna is that, you know what, you may need to love this person, to be honest, at a distance. That's not the default strategy, but that may be something we have to explore on some occasions. Okay, next question.
The next question is, you spoke of real needs and universal needs being the true driving forces. Could you share which ones you see often?
Yes. So behind people's desire for control, it's often people, that means people are insecure, right? When they're overly controlling. So what they need is security, right? So I see that when you see people who are overly controlling, you're seeing someone who's very insecure. When you see people who are very envious, right? So because of their envy, they're constantly trying to do one-upmanship, right? You know, so I'm doing a bigger talk than you are, all that kind of stuff. It's insecurity, right? So sometimes you may even help that person by keeping clear of their space, because every time you do something, they become triggered, you know, they feel, yeah, like they feel like it's a competition, you know? So you have to kind of really see it. And this is why we also talked about doing this in collaboration with others, because in collaboration with others, often, and this is a point that was made by Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj in a seminar called Devotee Relationships Part 1 and Part 2, which you can find on btswami.com. He says often when we reveal our minds to devotees, like, so I'm having this challenge with this person, Krishna will often use the devotee that we're revealing our minds to help us to understand what Krishna is trying to teach us through that situation. So you should pray on it, but Krishna consciousness is incredibly dynamic and it's alive. It's not a one size fits all, right? So, but you have to be sincere for this, right? So sincere means I don't just assume I'm going to shout at that person. I don't just assume I've had enough, I'm going to walk away. Not necessarily, because you may be carrying that mindset, which is going to draw the issue to you again. So the sincere thing, and this is exactly what Arjuna did when he had the conflict in the Bhagavad Gita, you turn to Krishna sincerely, right? And you turn to him through prayer internally, you turn to him through speaking to your mentors, your friends, your family, right? And you reveal your heart in an honest and open way. So this keeps happening. You know, and this is how I feel about it. And, you know, and sometimes the way we feel is not nice. It's not the way we want to feel, but it's real. And then we try to explore honestly, you know, what am I meant to learn, right? What have I done? Like the point that you guys made at the beginning, which is very powerful. What have I done to draw this situation into my own life, right? What role did I play? Because unless we understand that question, we will continue to draw the situation. What am I meant to do now? You know, and it's amazing. It's not one size fits all. But when we start to do this, and then we try different things, then often it becomes clearer. Okay, this is why you come into this situation. This is why it recurs in your life again and again. And this is what Krishna wants you to do. This is what you've heard from your Shiksha gurus, you know, your mentors. This is how you should try to act. So it's a journey in that sense. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, we have quite a few. One question is, how effective can a mediator be during a conflict between two individuals, or is it better for the two individuals to talk it out themselves?
It depends on whether there's trust between the mediator and the people. I'm going to read you this because I was just exploring this yesterday. And this is exactly to your point. And this is really, really powerful. Let's see. So this is page 122 from Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness on the chapter Resolving Conflict for the Benefit of All. Okay. Facilitators who are grounded in a deep understanding of universal human needs, willing to open to and communicate divine love, can remain in balance even when confusion and strong emotions surface. A facilitator is then prepared to relate with compassion to all parties in a conflict, keeping in mind that love of God and alignment with divine will are the only goals that will bring true satisfaction to all parties involved. To move all parties towards these outcomes is the primary role of the facilitator in this method of conflict resolution. Then it goes on to explain 6 stages in the process. So first we'll start with a centering process, maintaining a service perspective, clarifying the needs of all parties, understanding all viewpoints, moving towards cooperative problem solving, and the last one is expressing divine love and will. Depending on the circumstances, you may wish to serve as a facilitator yourself or invite others to play this role. So if a facilitator is mature and knows what they're doing and can bring in some of these elements, a facilitator can be really useful in helping people to come together and resolve conflict in a deep and lasting way. But it depends on the qualification of the facilitator and whether the others involved have trust in that facilitator as well. Next question.
Perfect. We have another question. It says, can you be assertive with someone with an ego, or is it better to just be submissive?
It depends on the relationship and also what Krishna ultimately wants. You see, we all play different roles. So if you're in the position where you're meant to guide others, it is sometimes your duty as a guide to point things out for the well-being of the other person. But you have to be very mature about it. So there's a place in Krishna book, I think it's a Krishna book number 1. It's the pastime where Indra, having tried to kill literally the residents of Vrindavan by sending, rains and so on, and then, Krishna lifted Govardhan hill. Afterwards, when Indra realized his mistake, he comes to apologize to the Lord. And in that section in Krishna book, Prabhupada says, only the father who has love for the son should correct that son. So you have to be very careful that you have the best, you're in that senior position, you have the best interests of everyone at heart, and you're able to communicate or address it in that careful and appropriate way. That's one thing. So it depends on the relationship. Sometimes something that someone is doing, you may even address it indirectly, you see, right? So you may address it indirectly. You may share it as a point of reflection. So there's different ways, but sometimes you do need to address it, but you should do it in Vaishnava etiquette, you see? So with peers, you'd reveal your mind. It's more an equal relationship. If you're senior to someone, you may share it as a way of guiding them, okay? But if you're senior, you can also request a clarification on something. If someone's senior to you and there's an issue, you may request a clarification. So I've noticed, as a senior that you do this. I was expecting that you would do this. I was just wondering, can you help me to understand why you take that approach? Because I would often think that this approach may be more progressive. So you're not telling them what to do, but you're trying to understand why they respond in a certain way. So there's different ways of addressing issues based upon the relationship. Does that in any way, does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so, Guru. We have another question. It says, I've sometimes noticed people take out their personal stresses out on someone else. How can we best take a step back so a conflict does not rise from this, but at the same time understand that the other person is stressed and needs support?
Okay, so first of all, we have to keep ourselves in good shape so we don't become triggered by others. That's the first thing. As we said, one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that in your life you're taking care of your own needs. That's one of the key things that cause you not to be so easily triggered by other people's behavior. Very, very powerful thing. And we don't do that enough. Now, if someone is stressed, depending on the relationship, you can actually say, Prabhu, I noticed that you responded this way. I'm just wondering, are you feeling stressed at this time? So you can ask us a question. It's very powerful. Very interesting point. When someone acts in a certain way, and you address it, not with animosity, but you just bring it up, that in itself is often enough for the person to understand and to think twice about their behavior. I'll just share with you personally. So my mum, as we were growing up, so she'd want to try and direct us, and I was just like, I just didn't like it. And I remember years later on, my mum told me something. She told me, and I don't even know how my father knew, but she told me, she said, your dad was speaking to me. And she said to me, my mum told me, she said, your dad told me. So my dad told her, don't try and tell Eddie what to do, right? My dad told her that. And she told me that my dad had told her that. And my dad, and I spoke to my dad about it, because he was completely right. It just wasn't working. And I was like, no, I'm not being dictated to, no. And my dad, I saw he somehow figured it out. He took a very mature approach as I was growing up, and he would share things, but he wasn't didactic. He wasn't directing, and he used this phrase. It really stuck with me when he used this phrase. He said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. He said, a word to the wise is enough. I remember that very clearly. And I thought that was very insightful. Right? My dad has a Brahmana nature, right? So he's very kind of thoughtful. He said, a word to the wise is enough. And I thought, yeah, that's it. So sometimes the way you address things, it can be done so subtly and so well. And you feel good because you know you addressed it. The other person feels good. I said to one person, on one occasion, so they had they were quite insecure and a bit domineering. So I actually addressed this in a gathering. I didn't address it to them, but I made the point that, you know, sometimes we won't give feedback to a person because they just can't take it. That's all I said. But it was so interesting. I was seeing out the corner of my eye, I saw their body language. I felt good because I'd said what I needed to say, right? I'm not going to give you feedback because you're overly controlling. I can see you're insecure, right? I have something to tell you, but I know you're not mature enough to actually take it. So it was there. And what was interesting is they picked it up. They picked it up and they came to me and they were asking me for feedback. And then we were able to have a more open conversation because we'd planted the seed, right? A word to the wise is enough. Because oftentimes the people who are misbehaving, if you knew what was going on in their life, you'd feel sorry for them. And at some level, they also know. This is one of the most incredible things about conflict resolution. One of the most incredible things about conflict resolution is that you are not by yourself. When someone has something that they need to deal with, I've seen this in 25 plus years in Krishna consciousness. When you deliver the message with good intention and in the appropriate way, whether it's through you or through another medium, then it's like giving them a gift. We're just the messenger. If the gift that is being offered is not accepted when you give it, if it's something that they do need to work on, don't worry. Don't worry. Don't be that insecure devotee. Remember that you're there with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When you offer the gift and they don't accept it, you know what Krishna's going to do? If it's something that's really an issue that they need to work on, he just sends another person knocking on their door with the same feedback. And they can only avoid listening for some time. If they don't listen, then Krishna turns up the volume and he turns up the intensity. So it's like, okay, I sent Bhuta Bhavana to give you that message. You know, Prabhu or Mataji, you're a bit too controlling, you know? And I can see you're a bit too competitive. Like whatever he's doing, you just want to, I've got to outdo it, you know? You just need to work on yourself and become less insecure, right? So if you deliver the message and they don't listen, Krishna will send them, he'll send someone else. If it's real, if what we're perceiving is a real thing and they don't listen, he'll just send someone else to say the same message. And if they don't listen, Krishna's after a while be like, look, dude, I'm trying to help you out here. I've sent 5 devotees to tell you the same thing and you're not listening. Bang. Then Krishna goes into what they call tough love mode. So you don't need to worry. We're not the doers. We can't control people. We can't make someone change, but we can offer the best we can according to etiquette, and then let the magic work through. Let Krishna work his magic. Any other question or comment?
We probably only have time for one more. Apologies to all those who have private messaged me their questions. This one says, how do you give someone you're in a conflict with their need when their need causes pain to you, or you feel what they are asking for is unreasonable?
So I didn't understand the question. Could you say that question again? Because I didn't understand the first part.
Sure, sorry. It says, how do you give someone you're in a conflict with their need when their need causes pain to you, or you feel what they are asking for is unreasonable?
Okay, so needs are universal. So people's needs can always, if we deal with a deeper level of conflict resolution, needs can always be met. Okay, the highest need we have is to be in line with Krishna. The more we're in line with Krishna, all our deepest desires our fundamental soul level needs are being met. So we have to explore this, and you have to explore this sometimes with the question that you've asked indicates that this should be explored collaboratively with more than just our own intelligence. Okay, but if it's a need, it's dealing more of a universal. So need for respect, that can be fulfilled in a number of ways. Need for significance, that can be fulfilled in a number of ways. Need for contribution, that can be fulfilled in a number of ways. You know, I'm involved in a project. I have a need to be progressive and productive. So I'm involved in one project. And today I was just thinking, I might just tell the people in the project, look, guys, you know, for me, it's not the best use of my time, because the project is something I've started doing. Then suddenly all these other people go involved, and I'm like, I don't need to be involved with this number of people for something which is this simple. It just needs to be done. So if you're competent to do it, I'm going to use my energies to progress or move dynamically in some other project that needs to be done. Because what I don't want is I'm on a call and it's kind of like we're going through the motions slowly, and I'm like, because my consciousness, I can figure things out very quickly, very efficiently, how to get from A to B. So I don't want to be on a call with 10 people going slowly about something that either I could figure out myself in a quarter of the time, because I'm going to be like, whoa, I'm losing time here. We're talking about something that could be figured out by one person. I know in the training we do for leaders, one of the biggest things over the last few years has been to get rid of unnecessary bureaucracy, having meetings for the sake of meetings, meetings about meetings. It's like, dude, really? Like, life is short. Do we really need 10 people to figure out this one thing? Look, you guys gonna figure it out. I've got another 10 things on the list. Bam, move on. You know, because then it's figuring out that kind of thing. So to answer your point, you need to have a collaborative discussion to brainstorm different ways to fulfill the needs, because there's always more than one solution. And that would be the way forward, I would say, in that case.